Daily Solutions.
Thank you.
All right. Hello, everybody.
Hey.
Graham over here.
Ashkahn and Question. Trying to make this is an efficient episode.
You mean your Ashkahn and your question?
No, I'll fill in the blank. You know, the context will provide the rest of the words for people's brains.
What?
Yeah. Question.
So today's question is thoughts on VR and float tanks. If we're not doing in-tank VR, would you suggest a VR session before or after tank?
Thoughts on VR and float tank.
I've had thoughts.
I've tried VR.
I think it would be really hard.
I mean, people have done it.
Yeah, it's just so salty.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's all the obvious stuff, right? Like electronics and salt water.
So, yeah, you should know that float tanks are really wet and salty, and people have trouble even,
But people have done it. People have gotten in there and managed to not destroy their equipment, and
We think.
I mean, people have actively told us that they've done it successfully.
Yeah. But we don't, I mean, for the first time, you know. How long are they going to be able to run sessions and their equipment stays active?
Yeah. I mean, the main thing I heard about it was that it's just a lot to have on your head. You know, it's kind of heavy and a little uncomfortable, and especially when you're kind of lying down like that in a place where all other stimuli are removed from your body. I think that to me sounds like it would be pretty noticeable. And I don't know, like, what are people
So I guess, first of all, I've never done VR in a float tank.
No, I haven't either.
Yeah. Nor I guess have I done VR immediately before or after a float tank session.
No.
But I've done VR sessions, so.
Yeah.
And I've floated a couple times.
Yeah.
So I'm familiar with that. So
it's interesting to me because the best VR experiences I've personally had are ones where your movements are somehow reflected in the virtual reality that you're seeing. Like you're in VR, but you're able to do something with your body that it mirrors what you're seeing in your headset. And so I feel like the float tank, I mean, what would you be doing in VR that would make your body movements? You're like lying in bed or like...
Yeah, like a lay-down roller coaster or something. Like to me, it has to be. Yeah, it would have to be a guided VR tour,
something,
right? You're not
like looking in space, or
as opposed to the ones. I mean, I personally think the most effective VR that I've done are things where it's a big space, and they've kind of mapped that space, like a big warehouse that has boxes or whatever, and they've kind of mapped a VR world on top of a pre-existing space that you get to wander through.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that feels really satisfying, right? Yeah, so...
And you can't really turn your head that much, or you're going to...
You have 180 degrees, yeah.
You're going to dip the thing in the float tank.
Yeah, so again, it has to be kind of like a guided VR session in my mind. Like, it has to be leading you somewhere, or you just have a view of something, then you want to be experiencing that specifically, right? Yeah. Just instead of staring into darkness.
Or it's just black, like what you're seeing in the VR is dark.
VR complete. Float tank.
And that way, you don't have to do any light proofing in your float center. Like, you just put the VR glasses on people.
Yep, onto float tank setting. You'd actually have to record some time inside the float tank to really get that darkness just right. But
yeah, little flashy bits of light and stuff like that.
So... Yeah, what about VR before or after a float session? Let's talk about that.
I feel like we sound like a bunch of old coots right now. Like there's probably someone out there who's done really cool stuff with VR, and we're like, I don't know about that. You're putting this headset on your head, and you get the salt water.
If you're experienced with actual VR inside the float tank, and you've done like a dozen sessions or something like that, let us know what you're getting out of it. Let us know how these newfangled headsets are working out for you.
Yeah, I don't understand these things, but. I mean, I get, like, it sounds like an immediately appealing idea because you're like, okay, virtual reality in an environment where you've removed as much of actual reality off of you as possible, right? Like, they sound like they'd really pair together. But just in the VR I've done, I don't know, in my experience, like, it's not like the setting I would think would lead to the coolest VR experiences I've had personally. But I don't know. We probably just are really out of touch. That's what's going on.
Anyway, write us if you've done it. Let us know how wrong we got it, So I do have opinions, though, on before and after.
All right, let's hear them.
So I think that depending on what you're using VR for, that doing it before a float can actually be a really cool experience. This is, again, speaking from a place of no experience on my part. I have not done this.
It's most of our podcast episodes, so.
But there is a pretty large body of evidence out there for float tanks that material you absorb right before going into a float tank or activities that you do, even just taking time to visualize things inside a float tank for yourself, taking a basketball shot or whatever, can have an impact on your skills outside of the float tank and definitely on your float and the content of it.
That's sure. I hadn't really thought about that in the context of in the float tank too. Like just thinking about it in terms of like, a way of watching media of some source. Because there's those old things about like, watching something in a float tank and visualizing yourself doing it. And there's like
totally.
mirror neurons going and something. So you could do like a really point of view, like doing basketball free throws or something like that while you're in there.
Yeah.
And just really like imagine yourself doing it.
Preferably it would be someone laying on a bed doing basketball free throws so it mimics your kind of horizontal situation,
Yeah.
Which, could be useful outside the float tank too, I think. So, but yeah, doing kind of anything beforehand,
Sure.
I think can really affect what you get out of a float, just because that's what's on your mind, that's what you've just done. So, to me, especially as an educational kind of tool, I think VR before going in a float tank just kind of sets your brain in that space.
Or just for relaxation. There's a lot of different methods of people doing things to kind of chill out before you get into a float and sink into it a little bit easier. And I'm sure there's like very meditative VR experiences and things like that out there.
Yeah, and then, even going on like a walk, like being out where there's colors at all is exciting after being in a float tank. So, I just think VR afterwards also sounds just kind of, all of a sudden you're like, you have senses of a completely different world. So
yeah, no, that sounds
like,
awesome.
It sounds just like a cool experience, but that's not unique to VR. That's just floating, making other things cool.
It sounds like an especially cool thing to do after you float. Like my prize goes to that one of before, during, after. I feel like I would have the most fun floating and then like going into VR directly afterwards.
So there you have it.
Those are our thoughts.
Yeah, that's uncensored, unedited thoughts on VR and floating.
And seriously, if we catch you on our lawn again, we're gonna be super.
You darn youngins! All right. If you got your own questions about stuff that we don't know, go down to floattankSolutions.com/podcast.
Type them in with your little fingers.
You young little fingers. And we'll answer them here in the studio with our geriatric walkers.
Okay. We'll talk to you guys later.